So today we're going to talk a little bit about the phosphorus cycle. More than likely this is going to be something that's totally brand new, so if at any point you come up with a question, write it down and send it to me and we can work through that. But what we're trying to take away from this cycle, like we've done with the water, carbon, and nitrogen, is to be able to watch and see where that nitrogen moves through all the different spheres, what spheres are involved, and then also how are humans impacting this particular cycle. And you're going to see words that you've seen before from other cycles. However, the phosphorus cycle is a little bit different, and you're going to see that right here in this particular phosphorus cycle diagram. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video and just look at this diagram and kind of see what similarities you see and what differences you see from all the other cycles that we've talked about so far. So I think after pausing the video, one of the biggest things that hopefully you notice is there's a sphere missing in this cycle. You can see for sure we've got phosphorus in the form of phosphate going into the biosphere, right? The other spheres that we can notice here is, obviously down here we've got phosphorus in the geosphere, not only there, but also here, right, dealing with rock. But also we have phosphates in solution in the hydrosphere. Okay, but where's the atmosphere? Okay, so that's where we're going to take a look first, just kind of dive into where phosphorus is and what forms in the different spheres. All right, so here we go. The geosphere, lots and lots of phosphorus in rocks. It's one of the key building blocks for minerals, and we all know that minerals are the building blocks of rock. That rock then can be weathered and eroded to form soils, so you'll eventually have phosphorus in those soils as well. As we saw from the last slide, the hydrosphere contains phosphate in the dissolved form. Okay, so again, if you're confused about that, just think about how salt is a mineral that can be in a solid form, right? But then when you throw it into water, it dissolves into ions and things like that. So think of it that way. You're taking phosphorus in the solid form, it gets dissolved and can be in both fresh and salt water. Biosphere, it's absolutely critical for life. It's one of those essential nutrients for life. It's in your DNA, it's in all of your different cells, same thing with plant tissue, and then also the waste that both plants and animals produce. You'll find phosphorus there. Okay, so the big thing, the interesting thing, the new thing for the phosphorus cycle is that it's not found at all in the atmosphere. Okay, so if you take anything away from this slide, it's that one. Phosphorus is not found in the atmosphere. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit more, okay, as far as a couple of key differences or similarities. One thing that's similar here is the idea that phosphorus is going to move slowly, okay? If you remember back when we were taking a look at the carbon cycle, there was a fast part and a slow part of the carbon cycle. That is going to play a very critical role here in the phosphorus cycle as well. So what you can see here is that it moves very slowly from on land and shallow ocean sediments. Okay, so kind of the geosphere, hydrosphere part of the phosphorus cycle, back to living organisms. Again, that's very similar to the carbon cycle. Okay, the slow part of the carbon cycle was the geosphere, very slow hydrosphere. And then when we get into living things, that carbon could jump from one thing to the next very quickly. And that's the same here with the phosphorus cycle. But getting it from living organisms back to the geosphere and the hydrosphere is slow again. Okay, so where humans play a role, and we'll see this, is moving, just like with the carbon cycle, moving phosphorus from the slow part to the fast part, and throwing the balance off there. However, what's different here compared to the carbon cycle is the problem we run into. One of the problems we run into is that soil contains very little phosphate. It takes a long time for the rock to weather and erode to release that into the soil, but we know that phosphate is key to life. Okay, and the first thing that's going to pick up that phosphate or that phosphorus from the soil are the plants, and then it transfers very quickly through food chains to other parts of the biosphere. So since it's important to life and there isn't very much of it, it kind of creates a bottleneck or a limiting factor for plant growth. Okay, so once the plants use up all of that phosphate, ecosystems start to struggle. Plant growth begins to struggle. So that's why humans, we go to the store and we buy fertilizer, because that fertilizer is very high in concentration when it comes to both nitrogen, nitrate, and phosphate. Both plants need. Okay, so forms in this case of phosphorus, there's only 2 forms to be concerned with. And that's nice because there's so many forms of nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle. We have organic phosphate or phosphorus and inorganic phosphorus. Okay, and the key thing that we need to know here is that it's the inorganic form of phosphorus that plants need, and then it turns it into the organic, which we need or other organisms need for life. Okay, so big takeaways here. There's fast, slow, and because of that fast, slow thing, phosphorus becomes a limiting factor for plant growth, and plants need the inorganic form of phosphorus to then transfer into the other parts of the biosphere. So again, taking a look at this diagram, okay, we can run through this. What they've done is they've kind of color-coded the organic in the kind of yellow color. All right, so we got phosphates and organic compounds. So the organic compounds are the things that make up the plants. Those plants then can be moved through the food chain, right? So anything in a kind of a yellowish box is the organic form, okay? Eventually, through the process of decomposition, we take the organic form and we turn it back into the inorganic form of phosphorus, okay? Which then you can see we get a nice little cycle going here, bringing that that phosphorus from one area to the next. Okay. However, sometimes these phosphates in the inorganic form can be leached into aquatic ecosystems, right? So when it says in solution here, that means it's dissolved. Okay. Just think of dissolving salt. All right. So there's ions of this phosphate in water. Okay. It can stay there. All right, or what it can do is it can settle out of the solution and become a precipitate, or an easier word, it becomes solid. Okay, so it becomes part of the sediments down here on the bottom of this chunk of water, or it can become rock. Okay, now eventually, this ecosystem that you see here can change over time due to climate change, due to lots of different things. And this body of water goes away and we're left with just the rock here, right? But this rock that formed millions of years ago is under the ground. So this phosphate is locked up. This is that slow part of that cycle. Okay, so the only way to get this rock and the phosphate that's in it to get back over into the faster part of the cycle is to do something called uplift, right? So going back to our tectonic unit, that could be through lots of various tectonic processes like a convergent plate boundary or something like that. Once that rock is up at the surface, then it can be weathered and eroded, and then it can be put back into the fast part of the cycle. Okay, so important that you understand, where the fast and the slow parts of the cycle are. Also important to notice that there isn't really a whole lot of terms for processes. That's one nice thing, one different thing about the phosphorus cycle. You're not getting bogged down with things like denitrification, ammonification, stuff like that. It's just understanding where the phosphorus is, the different forms, where it can move fast and where it can move slow. Okay, so take a look at this. If you have questions, again, let me know. What we're going to do, though, is move over to the human impact part. Okay. And this is going to be extremely similar to the nitrogen cycle. Okay, because they are both really important for plant growth, and they are very similar in terms of where humans are putting excess, and then where does that excess go and what impacts do we have there. Okay, so we can have excess phosphorus come from feedlots. Okay, a feedlot is an area where you have hundreds or even thousands of organisms on a farm, because it's a farm to produce, cows or chickens or whatever the case is. And that animal waste gets piled up on that farm somewhere. And unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot of place to put the waste. And eventually what can happen is it can rain, and that then gets dissolved and run off into lakes and rivers, and you just get a lot of excess phosphorus then in aquatic ecosystems. People, especially right now in the springtime, they go to the stores, they buy a lot of fertilizer. Okay, that fertilizer you put on your grass to help it grow, great, but not all of that fertilizer soaks into the ground, and again, it gets rained on, runs off into aquatic ecosystems. Unfortunately, a gross one to think about is your body produces excess phosphorus. We don't absorb all of it. Same thing with nitrogen. And our waste goes to a water treatment plant, but there's a lot of pipes and things that are from your house to those municipal sewage treatment plants, and some of those pipes can be leaky, which means that your sewage then gets into the ground, could go into the groundwater, and then we've got excess phosphorus and nitrogen in those water sources. Okay, so you should see a lot of similarities between excess phosphorus and excess nitrogen. Okay, so this is just a picture of things that you've probably seen before. I mean, in order to make fertilizer, we have to mine the phosphorus out of the ground. So again, changing the speed at which the slow and the fast parts of the cycle work. That phosphate then is turned into fertilizer. We get that put on crops. It could run off, right? It goes, those crops then could be eaten by animals, that whole feedlot thing. Okay, what I wanted to focus more on here is, where do we see similarities between nitrogen, excess nitrogen, and phosphorus? And where do we see slight differences as to where those sources of excess resources or nutrients produce something called cultural eutrophication? Okay, so if we take a look at this, lots of different sources of excess nutrients. Okay, so I would spend a lot of time taking a look at this diagram. Okay, we talked about the municipal sewage, right? And you can see it's both nitrates and phosphates, okay, getting into this body of water. Okay, again, discharge from municipal primary and secondary treatment, again, nitrates and phosphates. So a lot of similarities there. Okay. However, one difference down here in the bottom left-hand corner is through this process of combustion, right? Factories burning fossil fuels, whatever the case is. You don't see any phosphate there. Okay, a lot of that is the nitrous oxide that we talked about that some of you had to become in your nitrogen cycle game. Okay. Let's see. Both when it comes from streets and lawns due to fertilizers and stuff like that. Again, it's both nitrates and phosphates. Okay, we got our runoff from feedlots, again, nitrates, phosphates, ammonia, which is a form of nitrogen. Okay, fertilizers, again, nitrates, phosphates, natural runoff, nitrates, phosphates. One different one here for phosphates is through detergents, right? We use cleaning supplies those cleaning supplies have different chemicals in it to help clean. One of those is phosphate, okay, not nitrate. So that is a difference between those two resources. Okay, so again, I'm going to really stress, take a look at this picture, make sure you understand the similarities and the differences between where that excess resource is coming from. Okay, in the grand scheme of things, both are going to do the same thing. They are going to lead to this process of cultural eutrophication, which is, eutrophication itself is just the aging of a lake or aquatic ecosystem. Okay, it's weird to think about, but lakes and rivers are born, they go through a life cycle, they die, and usually when lakes are born, they're full of nutrients and very hardy with plants and animals living in them. But as they age, the chemistry and the nutrients change, and obviously with that change, life in those ecosystems is going to change as well. Okay, the normal process of lake aging takes thousands of years. Okay, without any human interaction, these lakes are going to be very productive for a very long period of time. However, we've seen over the past couple of weeks that we add a lot of nutrients to speed this process up, and that's the speeding of aging of lakes is called cultural eutrophication. Okay, eutrophication all by itself is just the natural aging. Okay, cultural, because we are part of a culture, is different. It's the speeding up of that process through what we just got done seeing on the previous slide of adding fertilizers, changing where those nutrients are in the fast and slow parts of the cycle. Okay, and what that's going to do is what you kind of saw in the nitrogen cycle human impact. Okay, it's going to increase the amount of algae at first, right, which increases oxygen and stuff like that. But over time, that lake decreases the amount of oxygen because we're leading to a dead zone. Okay, the algae decomposes, and through that decomposition process, we end up with a lake that doesn't have enough oxygen for plants and animals to survive, and is essentially just a dead body of water where hardly anything, if anything, can survive. Okay, so no real big difference. I just wanted to make sure you understood the difference between what eutrophication is and cultural eutrophication is. Okay, so we've gone through the movement of phosphorus. We've gone through human impact. So if you have any questions, please make sure you ask. Take a look at the video again, and